So the next question that gives rise to is, how did it come about that a philosopher who was so obscure and so difficult to understand acquired, even in his lifetime, such immense influence?
I think that's partly due to his situation at the University of Berlin, which was the capital of Prussia, which was then the rising state in Germany at the time, and also due to the fertility of his ideas in a variety of fields. You see, the influence that Hegel had is not just an influence in philosophy, it's an influence in theology, in history, in politics, in economics even, in law. Now, the fact that Hegel's ideas could be applied in those ways shows how fruitful his approach, and particularly the historical elements of his approach were, because it was that historical idea of things as having developed, as being a process, that could be applied by scholars in all these different areas.
Let's come now to the immediate afterlife of Hegel's ideas. One of the first things that happened when he died was that his followers split into two movements, didn't they? They were known as the young Hegelians and the old Hegelians, or alternatively, the left Hegelians and the right Hegelians. Can you tell us something about this division?
The right Hegelians were the people who thought that Hegel's philosophy implied that something like the Prussian state was the organic state which Hegel was pointing to. They thought that Hegel had himself said this in the Philosophy of Right, his most explicitly political work. He described a state, a constitutional monarchy, not very different from the Prussian state. And so they thought that there was no need really for further change. They were the conservative or right-wing Hegelians. The left Hegelians said, the basic thrust of Hegel's philosophy is much more radical than that. You see, Hegel talked, as we said at the beginning, about overcoming the division between reason and desire, or between morality and self-interest. That's a very fundamental change to bring about. You can't say that that's occurred in the Prussia of 1830 or whatever. So they said the thrust of Hegel's philosophy is for a much more far-reaching change, a revolutionary change. Now, they had to admit that in the Philosophy of Right, Hegel hadn't written as if he were revolutionary, but they'd pointed out the fact that Hegel's salary was paid by the state of Prussia. So they said Hegel compromised. He sold out. But we must be truer to Hegel than Hegel was to himself. We must carry the ideas forward until we get to the point at which these thesis-antithesis of reason and desire, morality and self-interest are overcome, and we reach the synthesis of a harmonious society in which those gulfs and divisions in human nature are reconciled.
And of course, as soon as you talk about the revolutionary followers of Hegel, onto the scene marches the greatest revolutionary thinker of the modern era, Karl Marx, because he was one of the young Hegelians. And I think it's very striking, after the whole of our discussion up to this point, to list the fundamental ideas of Hegelianism that we've talked about, which Marx simply took over and incorporated into Marxism. Among these are, first, the idea that reality is a historical process. Second, that this process changes by a dialectical movement, dialectical change, historical dialectic. Third, that it's all going towards a goal. Fourth, that that goal is a conflict-free society. And fifth, that until we get there to the conflict-free society, we're condemned to remain in one form or another of alienation. Now, all these absolutely central ideas of Marxism were taken over lock, stock, and barrel from Hegel. One has to say that there's one huge difference, and it's this, that whereas Hegel, as we've been saying all along, was an idealist, and to Hegel all these things were seen as happening to mind or spirit, to Geist, as you said, in the case of Marx, he saw all these things as happening to something material. Marx was a materialist. But the whole pattern of ideas remains the same. It's as if Marx has taken over a great long set of equations from Hegel, substituted a different value for X in the equations, matter instead of mind, but kept the whole set of equations in every other respect the same.
That's right, and you can see it, for instance, in Marx's materialist conception of history. The key thing in Marx's thought, where history develops, by the economic base, the material side, the forces of production, as dominating the mental, so that our ideas, our religion, our politics, all flow from the kind of economic structure that we have in our society. And that's an inversion of Hegel's idea. As Marx himself said, he stood Hegel on his head, because for Hegel it was the development of ideas of freedom and so on, that led to the formation of particular societies and particular historical epochs.
Do you think that Karl Marx could be said to have made any important original contribution of his own to philosophy?
I don't think Marx made important contributions to philosophy in the narrow sense in which we talk about problems of the ultimate nature of reality. I think that Marx was certainly a materialist, but he didn't argue for his materialism as a philosopher. He really accepted it as something that was pretty obvious, that what mattered was the material world, this kind of thing, and not something remote like Geist, which he more or less dismissed as a kind of speculative German metaphysical abstraction. So he didn't argue for that, and he didn't therefore make contributions to that philosophical discussion. But what he did do was give us a kind of a vision of a world in which we are controlled by our economic circumstances, and in which we are therefore not free. It's still rather like Hegel in that we are pawns in the game of history. And in order to become free, we must control the economic forces, which after all are our own forces. What is economics after all but our own ways of providing for food, providing for shelter, and so on. So it's a vision in which the things that we do control us, and we instead must control them. That's a powerful and broadly philosophical vision of the human situation. But it's not an important philosophical discovery in the narrow or academic sense of the word philosophy.